Welcome to Cleave and Merick Take Over the World. In this episode, we interview comic book creator Wang and the founder of XL Comics. Enjoy this informative show. All right, Cleave, we have our guest Wang on tonight. If you want to go ahead and tell us more about Wang.
Okay. Wang currently owns and operates Excel Comics, a digital publisher of original comic content and illustrated novels. He began his career in 1993 at Marvel Comics and has since worked for major companies such as DC, Archie, Tokyo Pop, Viz, and Yin Press. These past work experiences in the industry has brought him extensive knowledge of both American and Japanese art style and how it applies to storytelling in comics, anime, and manga. Welcome, Chi.
Thank you for being on the show, Chi. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. And also add that I do like cats. I like both dogs and cats. It's something I need to add to that.
That's good to know. I love cats, too.
He's got a lot of cats. So.
Yeah. I have 3.
Wow. That's great.
That's great. Yeah. So I bumped into Chi at Boomtown Comic Con, and I was really enjoyed having him talk a little bit about his history in the comic book industry. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, you kind of got started like at the peak of the industry before kind of, I don't know, some of the comics. It seemed to me like a peak time of comics. And was it 1993 or?
Yeah. 1993, I think, was still the peak of comic industry. Industry didn't really start going downhill around 95 or 96 is kind of what's going on. 93, just got out. I got into Marvel Comics through an internship program, and then right after I graduated, I got hired for the summer as a hired intern, and then of course because the industry was booming, there were just work everywhere, so I just easily got a job as a colorist to start out over there, just doing coloring work, and to be honest, really enjoyed the time I was there. Because you're a guy out of high school, and you're surrounded by people who love comic books, who talks about comic books every day, and not only that, but when in the office, people talked about some similar subject you like, the kind of animation, the movies, television shows. Pretty much everybody at Marvel watches Star Trek and wrestling every week. That was kind of the funny thing about Marvel Comics. And they kind of pulled me along too, because I really wasn't a big wrestling fan at the time, but I ended up doing that because of them. So it was just kind of a fun time to be as a kid right out of high school. It was like high school never ended; it just kept going.
Sounds so cool. I know Cleave and I both love comics. I was a big fan of G.I. Joe and Conan the Barbarian and Red Sonja and Spider-Man and stuff. And I know, Cleave, you read a lot of comics as well. What were your comics?
Yeah, well, my cousin collected comic books, and my dad and his brother were best friends, and so we went to his house a lot, and so it was like a library of comic books. He even had the long form comic books, the big huge ones of like Spider-Man, taking a serum, trying to not be Spider-Man anymore, and ends up with like 8 arms and stuff like that. He had those comic books, those kind of rare, and so I got exposed to them pretty early on, and every time we went over there, he lived in the attic. And every time I was over there, I was up in the attic. Like, it was like a library full of comics. And I tried to collect some myself, but it just paled compared to what he had. He had tons and tons. And so my favorites probably was Spider-Man, of course, like every kid probably, even today. And then, of course, I was a big fan of Green Arrow and Green Lantern. And a lot of them had, crossovers. But Marvel, DC and Marvel are so different in the way that they're written. DC tended to be, even the movies are like that too. But Marvel tended to be more, relatable to kids, I think, at the time. Because you saw Spider-Man, he was a teenager. So, but yeah, that was really cool.
Well, let me add a little bit to that, because from my experience. When I was in Marvel, a lot of the editors, we talk about the editorial staff, have very, very young, like college-aged assistant editors working for them. So Marvel really was packed with a lot more young people. You go in with t-shirts and jeans and everything. And then when I visited DC around that period, it is like a big corporate office. You go in there, almost everybody's in suits and ties, and you kind of have to be, you have to be chauffeured around. You can't just go in and just kind of party around all day, walk around the office. They have to check you in the door and bring you specifically to whichever office you need to go. And then when you're done, they kind of chauffeur you out. Marvel was like the minute you get inside, you can go anywhere. I can talk to anyone.
Wow.
So it was just a different environment at the time. And Marvel was just a lot more fun. And Marvel, most people don't even know about this. Marvel had a softball team, and so was DC, and they played off with each other every year.
Oh, wow.
And every year Marvel wins, just because we have younger guys.
That's great. Yeah, I was always a fan of Marvel, and I know that you were a big fan of Transformers, is what I understand, and that you really wanted to do Transformers. I was listening to some podcasts, and then you got into doing a lot of coloring for G.I. Joe, and I think that's really neat because I love the G.I. Joe comic book series way more than the cartoon series. It had a lot more intricate plot, just pretty more exciting, more edgy. I really enjoyed it. So when I was just going to Boomtown Comic Con, I was actually kind of getting reacquainted with my love for comics. I collected Conan the Barbarian comics, but so how exciting was it? Working with all these different comic books. Did you have primarily one comic book that you worked for mostly, or was it different ones? Or
well, I would say I primarily worked. I think I did a lot of work for the Spider-Man office at one point. But it's not like I was at a regular colorist because they had like Spider-Man had 4 or 5 books at the time. And something they had a backup story I do with something I need to guide to fill in on an issue. So I did a lot of work on that. Was probably primarily if you want to pinpoint, but also G.I. Joe at the time. I think the problem with G.I. Joe was they had a shifting production staff from time. Like almost you do every 15, 20 issues, they get a new staff coming in terms of artists and art team, and then even editors. Most editors didn't want that book because they have to deal with Hasbro and all that kind of stuff. So I just remember at one point, somebody asked me, "Hey, you want to do coloring for G.I. Joe?" And I said, "Okay, sure, why not?" I watched the cartoon. I know what it is. So I figured at least I got some familiarity. I was kind of excited too, because G.I. Joe was the first regular book that was handed to me, where I means I was on it for every issue until it was over. I got on, I think, 145, and the series ended at 155. So about 10 issue runs, almost a year. And this is like my first job, that was regularly handled, as opposed to, okay, here's a piecemeal of this and here's a piecemeal of that I get. So I was really appreciative of that too. And to be honest, I felt very proud to be working on G.I. Joe at the time, mainly because I kind of grew up on the cartoon too. Even though I was, in comparison, a bigger fan of Transformers, I was familiar with it. So, okay, at least I got out of high school. Here's something I'm working on something. At least I know I'm familiar with, and I kind of at least enjoy the Martian cartoon, and that was kind of my attitude on it.
Yeah, I probably want to start recollecting those comics. It'd be interesting to see, which ones that you actually colored. But that's pretty cool. Very cool. Very cool. I know that they ended G.I. Joe. You were on the last part of G.I. Joe as well. So.
Yeah.
What was it? Just because Hasbro pulled out of G.I. Joe, or what?
It's funny. Throughout the years, when I talk to other people, I've heard other reasons why the book was over. But from my perspective, and I told this to other people too, other podcasts. I said when I was there, G.I. Joe was running late. We had an artist and inker that was just, not everybody can pull in the deadlines, and it's because it's a growing deadline too. So I remember we finished 150, which was like big, sort of a big, number issue, that kind of stuff. So I think it got a few more pages on it, and that issue was running so late that because usually we would get the full inked pages to color on, and then they would. Because they would send me the ink pages, and then I would color it, and then, they would pack everything and send it off to the printer. That book was running so late, I was given pencils to color.
Oh, wow.
Just, photocopy pencils to color over, and you can kind of figure out where the ink places are. And I remember the last few pages, I had to go to the office that day to color right there on the spot, so they can just pack everything and send it off. So that book was running late, and I remember the editor at the time talked to Larry, say, "Hey, we're having problem with deadlines here, so why don't we put in a few inventory issues to help you catch up a little bit? And Larry agreed with that too, which is why right after 150 there was 4 issues of filling for the which was, I think, they had an inventory, so they, which were like standalone story. I don't remember they were all whether written by Larry Hama, but they had those. We used to have these called inventory books, where they would commission, have it done, be a one shot, either by the same writer or a different writer, but it would just try out a new artist, just do a one shot standalone. If the book is running late, we stick that in for 1 month. At least I'll help the artist get back on track, and and maybe hopefully continue on with a better production schedule. So that's why this 4 issues put in. But I remember very quickly after the 4 issues was put in, I saw the conversation, with the editor and Larry at the time. He's like, yeah, I don't want the book anymore. Basically it was Hasbro's decision to stop. I think the toy sales was winding down, and maybe Hasbro was putting some production costs for that book. I'm not sure 100%. But it was just the word is Hasbro don't we're done with it.
Yeah. So
they were canceling the book. And I remember I was kind of feeling really worried for Larry at the time, because I go, oh my God, we decided to do inventory, but put in 4 issues, and then we're canceling on 155, which is his last issue. So I thought, how would he even end the story? Because in 150, the Joes were still battling Cobra and they were on the run. Ended with them sort of just escaping, from Destro's castle, and they're trying to get away. So I was like, how is Larry going to wrap everything in 1 issue? This is just going to drop a nuclear bomb and end it all that way. And I really didn't know, and because we had 4 other issues to work on, So you talk about maybe about 3 or 4 month time, I didn't know what the ending was until I finally, got the art and the script for the last issue. Because you get the script too as a colorist, because you know, okay, what's going on? Maybe it's daytime, nighttime, afternoon, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was truly, truly, truly impressed by what Larry turned in for that final issue.
The final issue of G.I. Joe. So I'm curious. I was trying to understand what you said. So 150, they did some standalones in between 150 to 155. Because they need
151, 2, 3, and 4 were all standalone issues.
Yeah.
Inventory stuff they put in. Yeah.
I never thought of that, but it makes perfect sense. When you're running late, you got to do something.
Yeah. And then that means Larry had 1 issue to wrap up. That is, that is, I really was,
Was it a longer issue or was it just standard?
Standard, 22 pages.
Wow.
Yeah, he didn't get any more. It was just done and done. Marvel ain't going to invest any more money into it or time. So, but what he turned in, I thought, was unbelievable. Just unbelievable, because as if, somewhere there's a time skip. The battle was already done, whatever. The Joes got away and defeated Cobra, or whatever. And just ends with the last issue. They're shutting down the G.I. Joe base, and you see and you see everyone's like, okay, going to mothball everything, because basically they're just kind of like, wow, the U.S. government don't need us anymore, so we're closing down the base.
Retired, yeah.
Right, and then Snake Eyes got a letter from the story was the Snake Eyes got a letter from a kid that he saved once, and any of the letter says, oh, I was saved by the Joes. I was really inspired to want to be a soldier myself, so I joined the army, but my dad wouldn't let me. So I was really upset with him. But he says, hey, why do you write a letter to Snake Eyes? Because he's a real soldier. He'll tell you, the in and out, and make you give you a better perspective. So after that, Snake Eyes started writing a letter to reply to Ken. I thought it was brilliant, because here's a character who could not speak.
Now I got to collect the whole series.
Yeah. But the final issue, you heard his voice talking to a kid through a letter. And it's summed up, and it's I just thought it was brilliant. What a brilliant idea to make that happen as the last issue. And then he described to the kid sort of the reality of being a soldier and what it means to serve, the American military. And it was a really harsh reality, he pointed out. But he also, at the same time, he talked about very inspiring stuff where you see real courage and sacrifice being a soldier. The camaraderie with your comrades. And it just
incredible.
and just the last issue just ended with the kid getting the letter back, and he said to his dad, "Okay, I want to think about it before I join the army." And then the mother going, "Huh, I don't see a return address on this letter envelope." And then the last shot is the GI Joe base closed.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Yeah. That's cool.
I gotta collect those again.
Yeah, you gotta read that issue. It's one of the best comic book I've ever seen.
We'll be right back. The interview with Chi Wang after this.
Have you read Brothers of Chaos Part 1, an epic coming-of-age dark fantasy tale by Merick and H. Ulrich? Vandron of House Glenclair faces insurmountable odds fighting against the corrupt Melborians. He will rely on an unexpected friendship with an elf named Zankadin Umbadin and his alluring sister Zyla. Together they will face the will of the Blood Queen, Empress Ash Exana, and a treacherous plot of a beautiful young blood mage named Lilith. This series is epic fantasy, sword and sorcery, mild dark fantasy with some adult situations. You may find it on Amazon Kindle Unlimited, audiobooks with Audible, and you can buy the whole series in print. Brothers of Chaos by Merick and H. Ulrich.
Now back to the interview.
You get some comic books, but rarely do you collect the whole book. I don't know, but
Right.
don't let me cut you off. You were just talking about.
Right.
Sorry.
No, but it's fine. It's fine. But it's just one of the best comic book. It's a standalone story and an ending I've ever seen. And I think it was kind of beautiful, because it was the first time I realized it didn't matter who win the battle at the end or how the fight was over. What Larry gave in the last issue was the theme and the moral of the entire run of G.I. Joe. What is all this about? Why did we spend 150 issues writing this book? What are we really trying to say here? And it was I thought it was very, very inspiring. And I even say it even influenced the way I look at comic books and how I approach writing and producing comic books. Because what I really, really understood and walked away from that was it shows what it is to be responsible, be a responsible writer for a comic book. Because G.I. Joe wasn't his. I'm sure if Larry had his way, he would keep that thing going forever. But, the property belonged to somebody else. He was a hired gun. He was, suddenly just shut out of the property all of a sudden. I don't think he wanted to end. But then instead of just saying, okay, well, whatever, just do a fun little story, whatever, he really put his own thoughts behind why did I do this? What this is all about? And I thought that's the more important thing about when you want to approach a comic book project is that what is this all about at the end? Is it just for my own fun, or do you really hope the readers on the other end will get something out of it?
Yeah,
and I think that's very important. I think that's what a lot of books are lacking. Comic books are lacking these days.
That's always fascinated me, especially from the writing standpoint, being a writer, because I've always wondered how these writers do these, books and, frame by frame and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting a...
I think Cleave has a sandstorm coming his way again.
Yeah. So we're in a crazy time these days.
No, I'm just joking, but he did have a sandstorm a couple.
Well, I'll tell you, man. A few months ago, I was here in California. We're having firestorms coming. So.
Missing child is Emmett Costello.
Wow.
It's a Amber Alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an Amber Alert. I'm sorry, I had to turn it off around. My phone, if I turn it this way, it shuts off automatically. It just doesn't ring. And I left it up like this because I'd read the.
Right.
I don't know why I need to explain that, but anyway.
Hey, but Chi, I imagine this. So, how did working at Marvel influence you as becoming a comic book creator? Because I know at Excel Comics, you're not just a colorist; you do a lot more than that. You're creating stories, and how did the process? And obviously, I mean, they must have had a huge team of people to pump out these comics at Marvel.
Yes.
And then any one person is not going to duplicate having this massive budget where you can have people on staff who are just standing around inking and coloring and all that kind of things. So, but how did it must have been amazing, on the job training for comics.
I think if you work in any major comic book company, you see that everything revolves a deadline. you know, because they have to get the books out. It has to hit this, you know, it has to hit the printer on time, and so it can ship it to this, to whether the comic book shop or newsstands, whatever it is. And I remember very early on, one of the editor, I think, gave me one of the best advice I ever gotten. He goes, you know, you can take as much work as you want, but make sure you can turn it in on time. You know, because don't ever take the work from an editor and says, I can do it, I'll get it back to you maybe, you know, by the end of the weekend. You can't do that, because that really screws up everything. So that was always kind of the most important aspect that I walked away from, was that, yeah, you know, because of course in that time period, I could just walk around the editorial office, and somebody poking us out of the door and says, hey, you know, you do you have time to take this job, whatever. And I could sometimes walk away with just a you know, a pile of, you know, comic book pages to go home and color. But I never take it more than I could, beyond what I can do. Because there are times I have to turn people by and say, I'm sorry, you know, I can't, you know, I already got into the job. And to be honest, they'll be more appreciative if you can do that, rather than taking it and can't turn it in. So I think that's number one thing I learned, and one of the best advice I ever gotten. You know.
So Chi, you were born in Taiwan, right?
Yes.
And then your family immigrated to the United States. Let me ask you a question. Like, how is it? What got you into wanting to be an artist? Was it always I want to do comics, or was it just like I want to be an artist? Was it a definite purpose that, hey, I want to, when I graduate high school, I'm going to go work at a comic book company, or was there something that got you into art, or is it, you know,
Well,
how's that growing up?
I could say I always liked to draw as a kid. You know, but of course, not every kid who draws turn out to want to be an artist.
Right.
You know, it's similar to when you put a kid in front of a piano. They're always going to bang the keys, but none of them is going to be a pianist. But I drew as a kid, and to be honest, as a kid, I actually wanted to be a scientist. You know, I was really into wanting to do robotics. To be honest, you know, like go on to build a robot someday, or something like that, or that kind of crazy thought. But of course, when I came to my family immigrated to America in 1984. I was only the age of 9. So the number one thing I encountered was a language barrier. I mean, I was sent to school 2 weeks after I got here. I didn't even know the alphabets. I couldn't even say ABC, and we just started school that way. So language barrier became a problem of understanding what's going on in class, and I quickly it kind of lost interest in science because of that, because it's just a language barrier problem. And of course, I always drew. You know, though you spend a lot more time drawing, you kind of got familiar with it, and sometimes you start telling stories of your own. You know, so I think it just gradually moved on. I mean, you read Japanese comic books, American comic books as a kid. So, at some point, I just go, I really enjoy doing this. You know, just drawing. You know, I mean, I used to draw in textbooks all the time. Is really what it is. You know, my notebook had all the, but I would write but I don't like to just do a drawing. I like to do a sequence of stories of things happening. And most of the time I'm sitting there in the classroom, imagine me and my some friends going on some sort of adventure somewhere, you know, traveling to an island, or, you know, finding monsters or whatever. I mean, just very silly kid stuff. But I enjoy doing that. So eventually I say, yeah, I kind of want to do comic books. You know, and you think this is kind of a fun thing. But of course, if you grow up in a especially a Chinese family, to become an artist is almost like you want to become a beggar, you know.
Yeah.
So that was not allowed. But for some reason, I just set my sights on, says this is what I'm going to do. I even remember during second year of junior high, you know. So I think that was seventh or eighth grade, something like that. One of the teacher asked, you know, he says, hey, which of you kids are going to college? I was the only one in the class that didn't raise my hand. And the teacher was like, what, you don't want to go to college? Or I said, I'm going to go do comic books. It's exactly what I said that day. So it was very early on, I knew that was going to happen, you know. And when I went to high school, you know, when I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York, which is somewhat of a famous school for artists. I mean, it actually pumped a lot of you know, comic book artists into the industry during that time period. So Mark Teixeira, you know, graduated out of that. So was Joe Manariera. Joe Manariera graduated a year before I did, and then I'm Marvel Comic Books.
And so Marvel Comics is located in New York, or is it, or located
New York? Yeah, it was at the time New York. 387 Park Avenue South is what I still remember as the address.
Must have been exciting.
Yeah. So, but Marvel had an internship a program and a relationship with the New York public system. They were just getting interns that way. So and there was a lot more other artists that went in, that got into Marvel because of the program with high school art and design, and I was really one of them. And then in my sophomore year, sorry, not sophomore year, junior year, one day we had a guest coming. He was a comic book artist. I don't remember who it was. He says, "Oh yeah, I used to go to the school here, and I got the internship program. If you kids want to do it, this is what you can do." He talks about the internship program, and everyone in the class was excited. And I wasn't even sure what it was at the time. Like, oh, okay, what the heck is this all about? But I had some friends apply for it, and they didn't get through because you have to have, I think, at least 78 or 75 in terms of your grade average. And then later on I applied for it because I had a higher grade average. I was easily accepted. So it's funny. Out of my class, I was the only one that got accepted that year. And it's funny. I wasn't even that desperate to get the internship program. Not like some of the other kids, because I didn't even know who I was going to go work for. The internship program set me up at 3 places to go and do interview. First one was Valiant Comic, when Valiant Comic was still around. Oh, yeah. It was run by Jim Shooter. Mm-hmm. I remembered, that was the first one I visited. So I went into the office, and there was even Jim Shooter, and I know Jim Shooter because you used to read Marvel. You see the name on it, Jim Shooter, editor in chief, and he, they showed some of my artwork. He came and goes, "Oh, this is pretty good." Yeah, he goes, "Okay," goes, "If you work here, I'll you do some coloring or some assistant art or that kind of stuff." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that sounds pretty good." I'm thinking to myself, "All right, this is great." Is like, "Okay, yeah, we'd love to have you here." I was like, "Okay, good. Second place they sent me to was Marvel Comics. Now, the interesting thing is when I visited for the interview, Marvel, their actual editorial office was under renovations. So they weren't on that's usually in the 10th floor of that building. They actually moved to the 4th floor during that time period, during the renovation. So everything was a mess. They had just temporary lights and set up, and it was just it was just noisy and dirty. I was like, good God, this is Marvel Comics. They were like, no, this is temporary right now, that kind of stuff. And but when I sat down, their first question was, "What's your favorite ball team?" And I kind of stunned me. I'm like, I don't really watch baseball, so I don't know what it is. I don't know what to answer. Before somebody can answer, somebody else said something. So thank God I didn't have to answer that question. And then look at my stuff and say, yeah, it's pretty good, it's okay. And I said, but if you work for us as an intern, you're just going to be, like making photocopies, running up until the mailroom, bringing packages, and maybe do like bring coffee, that kind of stuff. Like nothing in terms of doing anything art like what Valiant Comic promised me. But for some reason, and this is weird, because if you've ever talked to people who ended up at Marvel, they'll all tell you the same. But when I was there, just that short period, even under that mess, I just go, boy, this feels great. This is where I need to be. Like, you just knew it. It's weird. Even when you see Jim Shooter talk about experience, he goes, yeah, when I first got there, he just knew it was home. And I had that same exact feeling. I go, this is it. This is where I need to be. I walked out of that interview. They didn't promise me much, but I said, I'm definitely going to Marvel Comics. Oh, yeah. I mean, for some reason, I can't tell you why, even though Valiant Comics promised me far more in terms of doing art. But it was just a feeling that you connected at Marvel. Says that was it.
Yeah.
And then this third interview was at King Features, which is the rights holder for Popeye and Betty Pooh. And they sat me down with the art director who was talking to me. And believe me, it was as if you're sitting in the classroom with Charlie Brown. You're not hearing a single word anymore. You just hear, rah, rah, rah. What if he said, rah, rah, rah? Right, the whole time I was like, I'm going to Marvel Comics. That was it. And then after the interview was over, a week later, they said, the intern coordinator says, all 3 companies had you as their first choice. So you have your choice to decide where you're going to go. And I said, I'm going to Marvel Comics. And that was it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what a further follow-up question. So, as you were in your career, after you became an intern and then you're full-time at doing work for Marvel later on, what point did your parents say, okay, he's not going to be a scientist, but he's making a real career with this thing, and they're like, good job, Chi? Or were they always supportive?
It went on for about 8 years after I got into Marvel, and it only stopped not because, and it was only my mother who was nagging me about this, And she stopped not because she came to terms with it. It was her aunt, which is my grand aunt, said, "Stop pestering with this stuff already. He knows what he's doing." And then my mother shut up.
That's
That
good.
was really what happened.
Yeah.
It was the aunt.
Yeah, that was really what happened.
But your
She
dad
had
was
to have her. Yeah, she
your
had to
dad
have
was
her
cool
adult.
with it. Yeah.
Well, they can't, because I think there's a difference between um I think there's a difference between a man and a woman, you know. Woman, I think, just wants security, you know, especially when they have a family. They want their kids to grow up safe and everything. But I think a man knows, you know, sometimes there's just that
You gotta
drive to
follow your
do
passion.
something.
Yeah.
This is what I want to do. So I think, you know, I never got any real complaints from my father, because I think and to be honest, this is how crazy it was. About a year after I got into Marvel, you know, and talk about just doing coloring work, I was making probably $3,000 to $4,000 average per month. You know, just doing coloring work, nothing
In
else.
the
'Cause there was that
90s
much.
too. That's really
Well,
good. In
yeah,
the 90s.
there was that much work. My father was only making 2,500 at the time. You know, so of course he has nothing to say about that. But my mother was still pissed at me at every turning point, and her argument was always, "You want to be a white collar worker. If you do this, you're going to be a blue collar worker." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So if you're going to work out, you got to at least be in the office as an editor. I say, "Mom, you know what Marvel used to call editors? They're freelancers that can't go freelance." Is what we used to call them. You know, so I will argue with her on that, but she never understand. You know, but it came to a stop because somebody above her says, "You just need to let this go because he ain't ever going to change."
That's that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, well, we go ahead. I don't you interject, Cleve. I talk too much sometimes, but so
Yes.
at what point after you're doing Marvel, did you? I don't even want to go past Marvel for a while. I love talking about this. Did you branch
Yeah.
off into doing your own comic books? When did you decide that has something I want to do, or I know, or is this just something more recently with the XL Comics, or because I've been checking them out online and it's pretty cool.
Right.
A lot of
No, thank
diversity
you.
of different styles and different things.
Right.
I'm really curious about that. We can talk later about the Captain China. I was
Sure.
really curious about that and how it's received in China. I gotta
Well,
understand.
that's a whole story of its own too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. But so what got you into doing your own comic books? I don't really want to speed forward anything if you want to bring anything out because I think it's a really awesome, just
Sure.
exciting and somebody who loves comics and just thinking about being in that industry in that time period too was crazy.
Well,
Before
go
you
ahead.
answer that, I was going to tell you that when we left the Comic Con, the Boomtown Comic Con, we came back to the city of Amarillo.
Yeah.
And we started eating at a restaurant, and Merick could not shut up about you and Marvel Comics.
Oh, really?
He thought that was so cool. He just kept going on and on and on. And I was like, okay, yeah, we'll give him a podcast. It'd be great. So I just want to tell you that he's a huge fan now. You've made a huge fan.
Well, you know, I'd love to talk to you more about it, whether I come back on the show or even in private. We can talk, converse about this, you know, a lot more, I guess. But I have to say that here's the interesting thing is, why I even mentioned earlier that while all my other friends were really excited about getting into the internship program and I wasn't that excited was my original goal, you know, was to graduate high school and then go to Japan and do Japanese comic book over there, you know, because I kind of grew up a little bit more on that stuff, you know. I mean, because I come from Taiwan. In Taiwan, our major, you know, comic book influence is Japanese manga. So I grew up with a lot of that. And of course, when I came to America, there's a period I couldn't read English, so I didn't really get into, American comic books until my high school days. Because once I was in that art school, everybody in my class was reading Marvel comics and so on. You know, so you just kind of
in Taiwan. Can I ask
you
you, do they translate the Japanese comics to Chinese, or is
yes.
it? And so you kind of have like just a Chinese version of it. And I don't know
Yeah.
if Marvel has a division or others that go into other countries. I don't even know.
They try, but it never worked well. But there's a major problem with Marvel comics, even American comic books overall, to bring port over to Asia is that in order to really appreciate Marvel comics or DC comic books, you almost have to start with the beginning of the history. So you talk about if they're going to print Marvel comics, they have to start with #1 of Spider-Man and go from that.
Yes.
You know, because there's so much backstory background stuff to go and then tie into other characters. So if you don't try to make efforts to understand that, you're going to be lost completely. It's very, very hard to follow. So that's why American comic books usually don't do well in Asia. It's very hard to repackage them. And then when you do, you talk about art in the 60s. And that's just very, very different and hard for people to get into. Unless you're just a diehard guy who kind of found out about Marvel through the sort of the recent movies and you want to know about it. And then there are people like that. But it's not a mainstream type of publication over there.
And manga is really popular right now. I mean, like the younger kids really love manga cartoons, and there's even graphic novels that people are into. The One Hat and the different series, the more darker ones like Death Note and stuff like that, and all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's what I used to want to do. But then here's the why it's very successful being North America. They're very easily repackageable. And a lot of them are much newer in terms of their art styles and the way they approach and how to open the story and then get you pulled into it. I think Japanese manga, excels in their very first chapter. Because I think they put a lot of effort into how we start a story. It could just be a boy meets girl romantic comedy. But how we start that very first page to pull you in, they put a lot of effort into it. And I think that's a disadvantage American comic books don't have or don't think about. And I think that's why they're easily repackageable and sell to other countries. And the other thing is they constantly have new material coming out, and there's always a new story, fresh, never seen before, that you can just package and sell and sell and sell and sell. New creators, new ideas. Not that all of them are great, but at least they're easily digestible compared to most American comic books today. And I feel like American comic books need to move in that direction, but we're very bad right now with the industry in that mess.
I have a friend of mine who has a fan fiction web comic that he does, and it's called Star Raiders, but it's a BattleTech thing. It's a BattleTech comic book, but anyways. So finding the web comics too. So so do you go to a lot of Comic Cons? I noticed you were going to Joe Fest. I was listening to one thing about you going to Joe Fest finally. Do you do a lot of Comic Cons or just?
Well, I would say I did a lot more when I was working for Marvel Comics because we used to get invited for free to go to different shows. But it's all really within the New York area. I never traveled far back then. I think the furthest I was traveled was somewhere like Pittsburgh Comic Con. And then for a while I didn't go to comic shows for a long time. Mainly because most of the time I was working for other people. I mean, to be honest, as a freelancer, sometimes you never spend any time. And then for the longest time, I think from 2004 all the way to 2008, 2009, I was primarily working for manga comic book companies at those time periods. So we had nothing to do with American comic book shows, so I didn't go either. And then after that, I actually ran an anime store for about 7 years. So I actually went to more anime cons than comic book shows. The only reason I'm popping up at comic book shows now is because I'm back into production, my own books. I need to start exposing them to the public. Is why I've started doing it again. Absolutely. And it really was just about a year or two ago that I finally found time to do that. So it's kind of interesting because the shows now are very, very different than what it used to be. It used to be you go to a comic show. Like the last one I remember I really attended, I was away from New York, and we were kind of there for our own independent reason, was Pittsburgh Comic Con. And because it's a comic book show, people come here for comic books. So you can have a booth that's not Marvel related, but they will come and talk to you and say, "Oh, what books you got?" I go to something like Booktown Comic Books. I realize people there are not really there for comic books anymore. A lot of them are not. They're sometimes there for Pokemon cards, or other gaming, or cosplay, or all sorts of other things. So comic books not the priority at a comic book show anymore. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, or somewhere need to be refocused on promoting comic books. But overall, when you go to Comic Con, it's really not about comic books anymore.
It's a lot of things. I know.
It's a lot of things. Right.
It's a lot of things.
Tabletop gaming being part of that too. So
it's evolved.
Right, it's evolved, and to be honest, I can't fault it because I know American comic book is very weak right now. For the two big companies, Marvel and DC, they don't know how to get their books to the young readers these days.
Yeah,
So
because
we,
everybody's on a screen or a laptop or a
right,
tablet. It seems like
right.
so, but I don't know if the even Marvel is a big e-comic provider. I don't really think so.
No, not at all. And because of that, we don't. To be honest, we don't have a real American comic book industry anymore.
Yeah,
I feel like it's really weakened. And because you can't back then, I'll tell you, even when I first came to America, at the age of 9, I started in 3rd grade. I saw kids in my classroom, pulling out a comic book they trade, which is Spider-Man, whatever.
yeah,
They would look at, I would flip through it because I couldn't read it, but at least I would flip through
right.
it. You get that kind of motion.
Yeah,
I don't really see that with kids anymore. And the thing is, I remember like that was my first exposure was in 3rd grade. Kids were passing a comic book sometimes, and then really started looking at some of them during junior high. Your junior high school, you'd be like, okay, well, what do we do after that? We'll just go to a little comic book shop and hang out. But back then, I would only buy G.I. Joe Transformer comic. I didn't even buy X-Men or Spider-Man. So it wasn't really until, like I said, when it was my high school days, that's when everybody was reading American comics. We had like Tom McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, all those guys. Silvestri, Dale Keown hit the scene. We had cutting edge art compared to the rest of the other industry across the world too. So you're in art school, everybody's buying that, everybody's reading that. The story was actually pretty decent, for the most part. So that's when I really got into American comic books, and I really started appreciating how good American comic books can be when it hit that peak.
yeah,
You talk about even something like Death of Superman.
yeah. I remember that.
It really was
I
a
do too.
gimmick event, but man, did it get people excited.
Oh, and there's a whole so many different takeoffs from that too when he was in
Right.
space and everything else. And then when they had the new Batman when the Batman got broke his back and you had
Right.
Bane.
Right. Had the
everything like that.
Azrael Batman come in.
Yeah,
But we can talk about these as part of pop culture too.
yeah,
And I just think at the time, comic book industry was thriving. I mean, they have great ideas. I actually think that Superman has some great promotion, like phenomenal promotion. And I think the best one was actually when they did the Reign of Superman, when Superman was coming back. I think most people don't even remember this because that was my final year of high school. I mean, we were really into that stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was like suddenly everyone was reading Marvel originally, but suddenly because of this event, people paying attention to DC. People actually bring DC comic books now. It was like, holy moly, Superman's dead. And we kind of knew he was coming back. But there was a marketing trick they pulled, was they seized publication for 4 months. I don't know if people remember that.
Oh wow, yeah. And there was that big last comic, The Death of Superman, and
they did the Death of Superman. Then they did Funeral for a Friend.
Yeah,
and because it was really the all the characters, all the other superhero characters talking about what Superman meant to him, what the city is like without him, and the final shot of that story run was Lex Luthor standing over Superman's comic with his fist on it, like he's beating him. That was how they ended that Funeral for a Friend. And then there was here's the brilliant part. They ceased publication, and they didn't even solicit it in the Diamond previews at the time. So when you flip through the Diamond for the next 3 months, there was no Superman comic book listed at all for sale. So it got to a point people go, well, this could be real.
well,
They're not doing it anymore.
Maybe
We'll be right back with this exclusive interview with Wang after this.
Orrin Knox, a wizard from a bygone era, has seen the world transform. Magic, once abundant, is now rare, overshadowed by the rise of steam engines and firearms. Yet Orrin's power remains undiminished, so long as he can find the elusive earth nodes that fuel his magic. To locate these precious sources of power, wizards rely on Diabolists, female magic users with the ability to detect earth nodes. Orrin Knox has tracked down one of the most gifted Diabolists, and she's being pursued by Dr. Henry Branson, a vengeful madman intent on eradicating wizards and Diabolists to avenge his wife's death. With the Diabolist's life in peril, Orrin, along with his trusted friend, Tobias Kane, must protect her from Branson's relentless pursuit. At the same time, Orrin races against the clock to find the Earth nodes he desperately needs. His wife's life hangs in the balance. trapped under a deadly curse that only powerful magic can break. Read Gunpowder, Magic, and Lead, a weird fantasy adventure. Available on Amazon Kindle Unlimited.
Now back to the interview.
Comic books can have a resurgence like vinyl records, because like we have
Well,
CDs.
I think they will. Yes. Yeah.
We have we had CDs, then we had MP3s, and then everything's just streaming
Yeah.
now. And then, but people are like, hey, if you really want to listen to music, get you a vinyl record, And
Right.
maybe comic books will do that. Maybe will have a more like, hey. And I don't know, does the cost of paper and printing, has it hurt the industry, or is it more
Yes.
expensive?
Yes. Well, I actually talked to people about this, at one point. I said, why can't comic book go back to newsprint? Because they went through the high glossy paper. But I said back then, why can't we bring down to that at least save the cost? And then here's the real reason. They told me if you need to print on newsprint, you got to print on really high value. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So it just tells me the comic book is not even on that high value anymore. They go into that would be more expensive.
Yeah, well,
and so it's really crazy and sad when you think about that.
Yeah, I would really love for like the pulp fiction stuff to come back with all the
Right.
It was called that because it was on the newsprint pulp paper, and all the even the like writers like us, the H.P. Lovecrafts and the Robert E. Howards and stuff like that. I would love to see that resurge and them have, but no one would buy those books anymore, like Weird Tales and things like that.
But I'll tell you, have you noticed that Marvel and DC has both been reprinting some of their older books now and put it back on the shelf? Almost exactly as it is, even keeping the ads in there. I visited a shop in Boston last year, and the owner was telling me, goes, "Oh yeah, these books sell real well on the shelf." I say, of course, because it's funny when you walk in the shop. He was trying to set up shop a little bit more prestigious looking, and make it look like a regular bookstore, which I think is a great idea. But he would sell most of his stuff. He would sell as graphic novel, but he has a section for comic books, and then he has a section for those old reprint comic books that Marvel these have been pumping out recently. He goes, "Those are selling real." I say, "Yeah," because I said when you look in when you just have your eyes glancing around the store. These things are simple color. They're just bright red, blue, yellow, and they just pop. The whole section just pops to you. And the other thing I say, they look and feel like comic books, as opposed to the current Marvel and DC version, where you look at it and go, I don't know, they have no identity. There's no nostalgia. There's no emotions when you see the way these new comic books look. But when I see those stuff, it makes you want to go pick it up again. Even though I still own some of those issues in my collection, I was like, wow, here's the Spider-Man, where they show the first black costume, I still pick it up and look at it and go, wow, it just feels great. I think they need to sell that feeling first. I think comic book covering needs to simplify. I think coloring needs to simplify. I think coloring with all these modern computer coloring, it looks too busy to a point where they feel too polished is my feeling.
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing with metal records. People buy that not because it's cool or easy to carry. There's at least a feeling of that.
Yes, and I remember going to just the grocery store. You'd have a section where you'd have your magazines and comics.
Right.
You didn't have to go to a comic book store to.
Right.
You could just go into Walmart or Kmart, and there would be or the grocery store, and there would be like an aisle where you would have magazines and comics, and I always loved that too.
Yeah, that's where I went and I bought Crisis on Infinite Earths and Secret Wars. Those are the last two big, huge sets that I bought when I was a kid. I was like, Secret Wars, they came out fairly similar to the same time period. Crisis on Infinite Earths and Secret Wars. And man, I read those like crazy.
Yeah, well, back then, we in New York, we had these called stationery shops back then. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. We go and they have sell a bit of everything. Besides stationery, they have like candy in the front, magazines at the back. They have other whatever stuff. Sometimes even an arcade machine way in the back. But they always have a comic book rack in the front. And it was just going to one of these shops and you flip through that and rotate it. Yeah. There's sort of an excitement and call to that, because every few weeks come back, there's something new on it. You flip on it. Oh, okay, maybe you flip through it. Maybe you're not buying it. But as a kid, I remember that just calls to you. And I feel like we don't have anything like that in a place where kids can easily access and draw them over.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, a lot of the comic books that I read were in the barber shop.
Yeah.
The barber had a bunch of them on a table, and you go to get your haircut when you're like, I
Right.
don't know, 6 or 7, and there was a ton of comic books there, and that's where I read a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, they used to be cheap. I think that's one of the reasons a barber can buy a book. He can go pay $10. I mean, back then it was 75 cents or less. So he can throw $10 and get 10 books and throw it up there, and he could refresh that pile every week.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you throw $10, you get 2 books.
And the other thing, the comic books was that, you go, you might like Spider-Man, but you go to the comic book store or the grocery store or whatever, and you see something else because it's visual,
Mm-hmm.
and you go look at it, you say, I want that Punisher comic, or I want that
Yes.
Iron Man or whatever. But I feel like now everything is online, and people are mostly just Googling this thing that they want and that. So
Right.
if you're trying to for new exposure, I think that's another different thing about our
Right. It's
society.
very difficult to get new exposures too, because at least back then that rack would have Marvel and DC, and I remember even what was it? Neil Adams continuity comic books. I remember the first time I saw it was on that rack too, and there's something about the smaller companies as well. So at least that rack gives exposure to not just the big two, but other comic book companies that can get into that system as well. We don't. You're right, because now people want to. I just want Spider-Man comic book, and they don't know what else is out there anymore. I think the whole industry need to get together. You talk about Marvel and DC, and then all these other companies get there and says, okay, what can we do to really cross promote each other books and make sure that people can see our stuff? We're talking about a time back then where you have something like Ninja Turtles.
Oh yeah.
Which you ever see? You know what it is. That original first book is a black and white comic. The art wasn't even all that great, but that thing can break through
With the story,
and become a major, talk about franchise,
yeah.
independently. But that's because the industry is healthy and thrives on sort of just crowd promoting and getting people. I mean, here's the question I always got, because I wasn't there when it happened. I said, how did people even find Ninja Turtle at the time? Did it just appear on those racks and somebody picked it, or how did they do it? But then it spread around because I don't know, everybody was reading that, and then next thing you know, the cartoon was on TV.
I actually
Well, they had them.
Go ahead, Cleave.
Go ahead.
I was just
just gonna say.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Anyway, a lot of times when I was kind of a sickly kid, and we would go to the pharmacy, and they even had racks at the pharmacy.
Yep.
And the racks at the pharmacy had superhero comic books, but it also had Archie and Richie Rich.
Right, they
like
did.
That. So I read Richie Rich and Archie and DC and Marvel. I remember reading a lot of Fantastic Four at that time period.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, Marvel, and they had them all there. And you just when you're a kid, you just saw what you liked and you picked it up, and
Yeah.
it was all together.
Yeah, but
Cross-promotional.
but specifically the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I was thinking about this because I watched something on this before. It's like I think the two guys were making it like out of a garage. They're pinning it and coloring
Probably.
it, and then they did a one run. I think it was like either 1,000 or 100 comic books in their initial run, and it sold out. It was just like one comic.
Right. They say sold out. Yep.
Yeah, it sold out. So they went ahead and reprinted. You put another order in, and that's kind of how it went. So I'm not sure, like, if they were selling these mail order, or like how did they? Were they?
See,
There's not that
didn't
many, so
remember.
I don't
Yeah.
know if they had a distribution at all. I have no idea. But I was.
But I
watching
think
that.
back then it was the industry was just they were just in a book. I think it was okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that hurt the industry for a long time was Diamond itself, because I worked with Diamond Distribution before, trying to get some of our books at one point through them. It was just a disaster. They don't promote you. They don't really care. You have to be able to produce a certain amount, otherwise they don't want you. And I'm like, you're just barring everything out the door right now. We need something that can move these books more easily.
Did the comic industry just get too big, and then it just kind of imploded a little bit?
And imploded, and then for some reason they never built it back properly.
Yeah,
I think that's the other problem. I'll be honest with you. From my observation, I think it's the people who are in charge that don't know what to do with this thing.
Yeah.
I think people who here's what it is. Most artists don't want to get into the business of comic book. They just want to do the fun, creative, drawing, writing side of it. They want the fun side of comic books. But I think the people who do get into business are just normal suit and tie businessmen. They don't understand how comic books are sold and packaged either.
Yeah.
So I always think there's a disconnect between the two sides.
Exactly.
And then if you put any of those guys who were a comic book creator and wanted to do business, it would be like torture for these people. Because they don't want to be crunching numbers and look at spreadsheets and that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why the industry never rebuilt itself. When things were great, everybody makes money, so who cares? They just keep sending this stuff out. But once it's in trouble, nobody's how to fix it.
Yeah.
And I think people who may have had a chance to fix it, maybe never got the resource or given the property, the proper, time period or whatever to make it happen. And then we just never fixed the industry the way it should have been fixed.
Yeah.
Because it's not like the Japanese comic book industry is running all that great. It may look great from the outset, but they were really running into trouble a few years ago before they could have started importing stuff to us.
Yeah.
They're actually very reliant on us now than we are on their own industry in the market at the time. So, because there was a period when I was getting information about, this manga publishing magazine is being canceled. It's been ongoing for 20 years and now it's gone. They were dwindling and dying too, and they're purely surviving on the fact that America is consuming their products right now. Yeah.
Is Robotech still going strong, or was I still do reprints of the Robotech stuff, or is it not?
Robotech is a weird property because it's originally it was like, part like it was a mash together of 3 different Japanese series that they bought the rights from over there, and then there's always been conflicts with that kind of stuff. Somebody holds the rights.
Yeah.
In America.
Because I loved Robotech. That was one of the things I loved.
Oh yeah, it was great. But the problem is, it's just got to a point where I think the people who are working on that don't know how to make that work either right now.
Yeah.
The weirdest thing somebody told me, and this is a hearsay. I don't know if this is the actual real deal. I was told that the rights holder was owned by a lawyer who was with the company at the time. So you're like, oh my God, you got a lawyer now running a property. That's not going to be great. If that's the case.
Yeah, really.
You need somebody. Good God, one of my friends used to say this in Marvel. He goes, and he's true. You just need somebody who loves comic books to come in and run these companies, and they'll be fine. But they don't get people who love comics.
They have a lot of other series that are like Robotech. There's Gundam. I know. I don't know if that's still big in Japan.
Oh yeah,
Gundam's really cool. It's similar in some ways as Robotech, but it's a different world, different story.
Well, it's also a sci-fi product of the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
Japan overall knows how to manage their properties better, but then that really comes from the fact that they're a much smaller market than us. Like a lot of people don't think about this. They're just a much smaller than market than us. They used to concentrate very heavily. And because it's a smaller market and they're not as diverse in terms of the kind of population we have, because over there it's all Japanese.
Right.
Here we have America, Chinese, blacks, Hispanic, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So overall, they can just market toward their own understanding of culture. They're a low-ion nation, so they know how to maintain property rights because of that. One of the problems that I even run into is America is so big. Just for me to get to Boomtown Comic Book is 2.5 days of driving.
Yeah.
So let's say
I thought I had it bad. I was 11-hour drive for me, but
right. But if it's America, New York Comic Con, that means I have to drive there for a week.
Yeah.
And I think that makes comic books very difficult. To unless you have you actually can set up a national distribution system. It's very, very difficult to get your books around if you're a small company. So our geographic location makes us very hard to kind of fix the industry. You need so much more money and manpower to do it. I don't think it's impossible. I just really think people need to get together and says, okay, here's our goal. This is the one goal. We got to focus on fixing the industry. Let's do it. Let's put all our resources and do it. And I think it's doable, because here's my gut feeling. The reason Japanese manga is selling really well right now is because American comic book is weak. But that means the desire to have these printed panel art material being produced and consumed is there in America.
Well, I can tell you the kids like it. I mean, I'd say my 9-year-old, she's drawn to those kind of shows on the cartoons. My stepdaughter, she collects a lot of the One Step and One Hat. I mean, and different mangas and stuff. And there's so many that I don't even know. I'm not current with all these manga comics, but it's very popular, and some of it's a little dark. I mean, some of it's just it's a wide range of romantic types, funny stuff, and different things.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, my
but
9-year-old granddaughter's drawing it now.
And you get that, and you got a more female audience too with some of the manga comics too as well.
right. Well, but I always felt like if America comic company really pull their weight, we can fill that demand back, or at least a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
You know, we just got to start. The reason you mentioned, you look at Excel, have all variety of stuff, is because I try to hit a variety of different customer base. I don't want just people who read superhero. I don't want just people who looks manga. You know, I have a Christian comic book too because I want those different crowds. And I think comic book company needs to start looking that direction, having different art style too. But I don't know. I face with so many obstacles when I try to sell my own books. Sometimes it's just like I said, geographically, it's so big. Where to even start?
This is the end of part 1. Please join us for part 2 of this exclusive interview with comic book creator Chi Wang.